Jesus, I believe. 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 I believe in you. I believe in you.
Lord, we thank you for Phil, and we thank you for his and the gift he is, and the amazing job he's doing with this conference. Thank you for his gifts. We ask you to send your peace into his heart and your joy, and to pour your precious blood over him.
Makes his availability to you.
Yes, and we pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
So praise God. So here's welcome, Phil. Our friend here, Phil, is from England. In fact, he's from a very famous city. Where that song that that Bishop John was talking about is from. So,
Yes.
And so we know Phil through, again, the Pilgrims of Love and Marino Restrepo. In fact, it was through his big brother that I met Stephen Pauline, and that through Stephen Pauline, I was given a CD of Marino's talk. So it all ties in, doesn't it? Nothing is by chance with God. So Phil, how are you doing?
I'm great. And it's actually been fantastic watching all this come together. And I was just struck there by how by your saying that we've been brought together as like God's people. And in this great network over the internet, we've met all these new people, and more people are kind of coming into our chat, and they're often offering their stories as well. It's a fascinating thing to watch.
Yeah, praise God, praise God. So Phil, we have been speaking to you a lot in the last few days, brothers and sisters around the world. This is the man behind a lot of the technology. So keep him in prayer. But also, Phil, we've spoken to you almost every day, almost since the lockdown, because we're part of this prayer group, brothers and sisters, that we meet daily to pray the divine mercy. But Phil, how has this time of lockdown been for you on a human level and on a spiritual level?
Human level first.
Human level first. I suppose on a human level, I found it, a lot of people said, oh, I've got more time now. I'm not having to go out here or there. And I've actually found it, all of my time has been really focused into pretty much being stuck in this room here because of, my work has moved online, and that's got very busy. And I work a lot with technology and that. And I suppose like all the socializing that I might have done when I was living over in Liverpool in the city, and that's all kind of moved into the online realm as well. So it's been a very different kind of turnaround where the pace of life that was very quick perhaps before has slowed down in some sense into one location, but it's still very busy. And I found that kind of connections with people that haven't happened for a long time have sort of come out of the woodwork. I've been able to connect with old friends through the various social media apps that are popular these days. And that's just been an incredible opportunity to reconnect and re-network, I suppose. And I suppose talking about our, the opportunities we've had to talk and connect as well. That's just been a fantastic chance. In amidst like a very strange situation where, almost the brakes have been put on everything else in society, and that's all slowed down. And watching the struggles that people go through, it's very heartbreaking actually to hear about all the difficulties people have been having. So yeah.
Well, just recently now, you gave up your flat.
That's right. Yeah. It's interesting, Eddie. I was pondering this before because this actually rings in like an echo of some of the things the speakers have been saying today. One of the things I decided to come back, spend time with family during the lockdown. But in doing so, I realized actually this might be a change now because I'm going to get rid of the flat. I wanted to anyway. But also bigger than that, I wanted to declutter. So I was one of the few people that decided to move house and move all my stuff and get out during lockdown. And that in and of itself is a tricky thing to do. And in doing so, I realized how much clutter I actually had, physical material clutter, all the stuff I'd accumulated, all the things I wanted to do with that bit of, those books, with that technology, with those cameras, all of these things just fed into different hobbies and all sorts, lots of plans. And I was accumulating things to sort of mirror those plans, but nothing ever happened with them because there was too much stuff. And in getting rid of it, I've literally got rid of almost everything. I perhaps have maybe a carload left of possessions that I own.
Yeah.
And getting rid of it, I've realized that I feel a bit more free now. I'm not so tied to those possessions defining me. And it's allowed me to look a bit deeper in questioning beyond that, my spiritual journey, you know, in my faith and those that clutter.
Yeah, how has that been
There's
in
that.
this time? Your faith, how have you journeyed in this time of lockdown? Because you're a practicing Catholic, you know. I know that
That's right.
you've often told us that some of your friends who aren't in their faith, it's very strange because you can't separate your faith, your faith with who you are, you know. So can you share something about that?
Yeah, sure. So my faith's always been there, but I sort of made a conscious effort when I was about 17 to like, I'm going to take myself to mass regularly and just experience what it is about faith. And my real change came when I joined like a Protestant prayer group just to mix with other people who were praying, and there was a bit of a challenge there on my Catholic faith, and it led me to kind of delve into it a bit deeper and to find out what's the reasons I believe these things. And alongside that, I had this lovely opportunity to go to a retreat with a popular Catholic movement in the UK, which is Youth 2000. And the thing that turned me around in that retreat was the priest during adoration. I didn't really know what adoration was at the time. I hadn't really attended it. I'd seen my mum go occasionally. But the priest pointed at the Eucharist and he said, there at the front of this chapel, that's the creator of the universe. And it was those simple words were the penny dropped for me. And I was like, this doesn't make sense now. And this is why we have reverence. And this is, you know, there's a love came from that, and it just flowed out of that. And I started to understand what the sacraments meant. And then through that developed my faith into what it is now. And I was able to kind of build and understand the reasons why I came, you know, why I'm Catholic and why I believe what I believe, and be able to verbalize that. And it became very much part of my life. So yeah, I do work and move in a very, you know, it's a more secular environment, especially when I was living in the city. And that was an opportunity really for me to just be who I am. I would go to mass daily, spend time in church, and it's that kind of rubs off, I suppose. People see you doing it. I didn't have to say anything. They just asked me about it when they were interested, and I'd share it.
It's a really good opening, isn't it, to talk about faith, and they see that you're different and you're dealing with things differently.
Yeah. So I suppose your question about this, how has it been in this lockdown? It's I found it a struggle in terms of normally my prayer life, you know, I'd go somewhere, like I'd go into the church and I'd pray in the church, and that quiet and that solitude was a lovely separation from the busyness of life and the clutter that life brings. And I think now I've moved into this environment where we're watching our masses online and everything. On one level, I found it tricky because I'm constantly interacting with the computer screen anyway for work and carrying on afterwards for the mass and everything. So I found that tough, but I've noticed there's sort of a silver lining on top of this, which one of the priests in one of the masses that I watched in Ireland, and he said, he was an African priest, and he said, the silver lining of this COVID is the fact of love. And we're learning to love, and we're seeing through the busyness and the clutter, and we're seeing love. And I took that to heart, and it made me realize that I'm participating in something that's global. You know, the church is beautiful in that way. I'm seeing all the different churches through the different masses I go to, and I've got an opportunity to go to any of them because they're online. And although I've not got that, it saddens me that I don't have that opportunity to go in the church in that quiet place and spend time with Christ, you know, in front of the tabernacle. But I can spend time with my family in this kind of global church. You know, Catholic means universal, and it's global, and so you can dip in at any point.
Yeah, and do you find, is there anything in your life, in your experience, in this time of the pandemic, that where you feel what have been some of the blessings, you know, that maybe you know, like for example, Eddie was talking earlier about the prayer time, I think it was, and me for going to mass, you know, and thinking about our souls and this. I thought Bishop John and Michelle Moran and Sister Anna Christie touched upon it about, is this going to take you to heaven? You know, like this thoughts that is this going. Yeah. What has been a blessing for you in that?
I think one thing that struck out to me is I'd regularly go to confession. I'd like to go every week because I always feel I got something to bring. And the struggles in life, just generally, especially as a young person growing up and starting in that workplace environment, and as you get more used to it, you do take on a lot of things that perhaps the secular world has to offer, and you've got to kind of deal with that. And often I go to confession for those purposes. And I've noticed that a lot of the sins that perhaps I was confessing regularly in those confessions, since being in lockdown, because the opportunity for going for that sacrament hasn't been readily available, I've been very conscious about any spark of temptations or things that come up that I would normally have to then confess maybe a few days later or the week following. I've been jumping on the temptation straight away and giving it to God and passing it over to him and allowing myself to submit to his will. And in doing so, those things have sort of lost I'd say sort of a power in that sense, the sins that might have crept up normally. And what I've been able to do is re-navigate and see, oh, there's a clutter here. And this is a clutter of perhaps weaknesses that may have led to those things in the first place. And now I'm in that stage. I'm sort of going through this clutter and seeing what's going on. And it's funny because moving out of the flat and everything that I was doing on a human level is actually my spiritual life's it's putting a magnifying glass onto it, and the two things are mirroring each other. So I'm realizing as I'm going through this declutter, it's happening as well in the spiritual life, and it's all going on through this lockdown experience, which is God's way of working on me personally. But everyone's story will be different.
Yeah, but God does use that. I remember once discerning my vocation. This was maybe 20 years ago, not quite as long, maybe 15, 16 years ago, when I was asking, well, God, what do you want me to do? And I had an experience with these Benedictine sisters in Italy, because I grew up in Italy. And they put me to work in the garden, and I was fighting weeds that were taller than me, and I'm 5'10". And I suddenly, everything Jesus talked about, the weeds and pulling them out, and it helped me understand those areas in my life that I had to work on, which is what you're saying as well, this decluttering. It's funny that you were doing it spiritually, but yet you had an opportunity physically to also declutter. Yeah, amazing.
And Phil, obviously now, for people that maybe are missing, for instance, you're in the process, you're going with a girl who stays in Ireland. So there's a distance there. Before that, you were able to travel and different things. See, for people, maybe young people that have got a girlfriend that they can't see, and they kind of struggle within that. How are you coping within that area, you and Orla?
Well, I think that's, it's an opportunity for us to kind of spend time apart, obviously, but in that we're forging other kind of forms of a relationship that is over distance, but it's still keeping that strong through communication, really, and most of all prayer on top of that. So it's been a chance for us to spend time, particularly with novenas. We often turn to the saints and praying different novenas, and especially on the things that maybe, in the early days of a relationship, when we start to kind of go, okay, this might be an issue, let's pray on it, and then passing that over to God through the novenas of the saints. And we do notice things unfolding. It's fascinating to see, actually, in that journey. So the time apart is giving us a time to pray, and to see God's will and discern God's will for us in our lives.
I think that's this time of prayer, it's unique, it's unique. I also think about couples maybe who got married at this time, and how strange it must have been, they had to let go of their dreams and aspirations, but yet it is a time of growth and of deepening, and thank God for modern technology. When my parents got engaged, my mom is Spanish and my dad's Scottish. She went to America to the United States for a year. No Instagram, no Facebook, no Zoom. And yet my parents have been married 50 years, so the distance and just the communicating to be able, and to be able to.
It's funny that, Trace, I was born in the 80s and grew up mainly in the in the 90s, and just seeing that if this lockdown happened in that period of time, it'd be a very different story, I think, for all of us, especially an opportunity like this to spend time in sharing, really, which I think is the most important thing. We've got these wonderful testimonies that people are giving, and the speakers in bringing out their own testimonies as well, and it's fascinating that we can actually share this at this time with the world,
This is a slightly off the slant, but as a young person living in this time and turning to the saints, as you said, who are some of your favorite saints and why?
I've got many, because I just felt them telling me to tell a story once. I often take that and think, I've got to do something with that, but I'm not sure what yet. But yeah, Saint Joseph stands at the top of. He's been a real help in life, and Saint Philomena as well as someone I've turned to, in times of asking for help and guidance as a young person with the struggles of life, and the struggles with the things that the world deals with. And then there's a whole host of others, and all the names escape me suddenly. But what I often find with saints is they'll appear suddenly. So I'll be perhaps in a chapel, or I'll be, I could be even like just on a bus somewhere, and I see a picture and it's one of the saints that I recognize, but perhaps don't know. I've seen them before, but I don't know the name. So I'll go and look into them and find a novena, and then actually start a prayer, because I often think the saints pop up and just they let you know they're around,
Yes.
Because it's interesting, Phil, because we had the great privilege last year, St. Therese of Lisieux, the Little Flower, came to Scotland.
Yes.
And it was quite an amazing experience. And the way it worked out, I went, me and Therese went, and which was fantastic.
You got to go 3 times.
I got to go 3 times, which was great because I took other people. But my question was, it was quite interesting. My question was, now, St. Therese came to Scotland, and when I was there, I was looking at him saying, why have you come to Scotland, St. Therese? That was, and as I thought about it, I remember saying to Therese, do you know something? I think St. Therese's came to Scotland to give us graces for the times ahead.
Yes.
And I never thought we were going to come into these times, such a time as this, but I really believe, through the saints, that there's a grace that we get, and that they're kind of get that foresight to prepare, and then preparing the way. And I've held on, but obviously I've got a devotion to St. Therese, which I love. She's just amazing. But I thank her every day for our coming, and for the graces that we received for these times ahead, and for those that need those graces as well. That they
it's so true that the saints are as Catholics, we believe in the communion of saints. I remember being asked this because I was singing out loud in a supermarket in Wales when I went to see Marino once, and this person said, "Oh, it's so nice to see a young person," because it was a long time ago, so happy. And I said, "Well, I'm praising God." And he said, "Oh, really? What church do you belong to?" And I said, "I was Catholic." And he said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "Well, tell me this. I'm Baptist or something." And he said, "How do you explain this thing about the saints, something?" And I said, "Well, there's no time for God. So I can ask you to pray for me is the same as asking Saint Therese to pray for me." So we had this wonderful exchange, because I guess what's fantastic about the saints is that they've lived life, and they've experienced things that they understand. It's like the importance of testimonies, like you giving your testimony today. That's important.
It's funny you say that there are saints as in the modern times, and perhaps haven't been called a saint yet. In this time of the pandemic, we watched one of the documentaries. It was on Sister Claire, from Derry, and it was the All or Nothing was the name. And I just remember it struck me how she went from being just everyday, day-to-day normal person as we would recognize it, to someone who was who just went for God. And she that was her quote, all or nothing. And it was someone who went for sainthood, and I know she hasn't been, there's not confirmed saint or anything like that, but I'm of an opinion that at some point we'll probably hear more talk of her being case being put forward for sainthood, because it's a very interesting story of someone who gave her life, and what it means for us all really in this. We've shifted a normal in the lockdown experience and everything, and we're moving to something different, and it's very strange for us all, but it does mean change happens, and in this experience, change can happen in our hearts for God. And in that we can go for sainthood. We can go for what God's called us to be. We can go from this very normal as we understand it to something that is actually really normal in the eyes of heaven.
It's like isn't it like, I think he's Blessed Giorgio Frassati, this young, popular, handsome young man who just, when he died, so many people turned up at the mass, and his parents couldn't get over this. And it turned out he had, in the goodness of his heart, reached out mentored and people. So amazing. Saints are really powerful. So if you were to give a word of encouragement to any young person who's watching this, who, what would you say to someone who is, struggling at the moment, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I'd say one of the main things is just switch off the distractions, turn off the clutter, whether that's, only you'll know what that is. For me, it's technology, and it's being constantly connected and constantly wanting to watch the next Netflix show or something like that. Switch it off and spend time with God in prayer, read scripture. Our speaker's talking about spending time, just allowing God to love you, and then discover who He is. And in that, you'll find a path that, because I thought of this earlier. Clutter is like baggage, and we're all meant to carry our cross in life. But if we're carrying all this baggage, it's hard to carry the cross properly, and you kind of stumble a lot more than you should. Drop the baggage and walk with the cross, and you'll end up where God wants you to be. And it'll be the journey you love being on, because it's the journey to Christ and with Christ.
And God always says, I've come to give them life and give it to them in the full. And that's, I think, the thing that always amazes me, just when you're thinking, I can't take this anymore, and you hand over to God because you come to your sentence, and all of a sudden there's joy in carrying that cross, because God's got you. He's got your back. So that's wonderful, Phil. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So we're going to say bye now. And we're going to bye. Thanks for sharing your witness. Thank you for your yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.